see so much enthusiasm for civic engagement, and I do really believe, to be quite honest, that what we are doing, whether we agree or disagree, is exactly what our founding fathers designed 240 years ago. They asked us to come together and engage. So, a lot has gone on since our last town hall about 20 days ago. This is actually our 5th town hall since September 1st, so the last 3 months. And for me, when I decided to run for Congress, I felt very firmly that Congress has some very basic jobs, and these are outlined in the Constitution. First, to pass affirmative legislation that helps people lives. Secondly, to provide a check and balance on the other branches of government. And thirdly, to be available to your constituents. And I remember in 2017, watching as members of Congress around the country were refusing to come out even when they were making tough votes, and I didn't agree with that. So part of the reason that I'm here today is to demonstrate that even if we don't agree and there's controversial things going on, I will always be here and always be available to listen and to hear them. Going on in Congress, and I know, I certainly know, that lots of folks are here to talk about impeachment, but there are a few other things that we have either voted on or have announced in the past 20 days that will have a distinct play on what will happen here in Michigan, and we've been getting a lot of calls on those things, so I want to be respectful to everyone who's engaged our office. We will talk, of course, about the impeachment inquiry, but we will also talk about really big things like the USMCA, or sort of the next agreement after NAFTA, as well as prescription drug legislation. So let me just give you a quick outline, then we'll take your questions. We'll move to questions. So one of the big bills we passed last week is something called H.R. 3. It is a prescription drug piece of legislation aimed at lowering prices. And it does 3 big things. Number 1, it allows Medicare to negotiate for drug prices. It the cost of prescription drugs and the cost of healthcare is still by far the issue that I am engaged most on. If I'm at Kroger, or if I'm at Meijer, if I'm walking down the street, people will come over to me, they will grab my arm, and they will want to tell me their story with prescription drugs. That is especially true for people who are diabetics, and I'm sure there are some in this room, for people who have asthma or children with asthma, for people who have chronic illnesses and conditions. So, for instance, we have about 850,000 people in the state of Michigan who are diabetics, about 1 in 9 or 10 here in the state. And right now, our diabetics pay anywhere between $1,200 and $20,000 per year on insulin, on the little vials of insulin that their lives depend on. If we are able to negotiate for drug prices, the price of insulin could go down to $400 a year. That is a major savings. The other thing that H.R. 3 does is it helps expand what Medicare covers. And in particular, brings in regular routine checkups on vision, hearing, and dental. This is something I heard a lot about over the course of the past year and a half. People would actually send me letters saying, you know, we have teeth and we vote. They would send me toothbrushes because they wanted dental coverage covered by Medicare. I'm particularly happy about this part of the legislation because I introduced the vision piece. So if this passes through the Senate, everyone on Medicare will get a checkup for their eyes once every 2 years, which is the recommended rate. Right now, that's not covered by Medicare. And everyone on Medicare will get 1 pair of glasses or contacts covered every 2 years. This is a new expanded Now, allowing Medicare and the government at large to negotiate for drug prices will be a major cost savings. The Congressional Budget Office believes it will save Medicare and the government at large $450 billion. What that allows us to do is pay for that extended coverage for dental, for hearing, for vision. It also ensures that we invest $10 billion into National Institutes of Health so that America is always the place that invents the next big life-saving drug. We always want to be the place that is on the cutting edge. That is our commitment, to, particularly to people with rare diseases, and I think this bill goes a long way to furthering that. USMCA. So for folks who don't know, that is the next agreement that the President Trump has negotiated to come after NAFTA. If you remember, he came in with a real mandate. Which is something he suggested, folks. So he wanted to negotiate a new agreement and to threaten to cut NAFTA, which we know has had such an impact on our state in particular. Unless we got a better deal.
Because the jobs went to Mexico!
We were very happy to hear that the President and House leadership have negotiated an agreement on the USMCA. And I have to give a lot of credit to both the President and the President's negotiator, a man named Ambassador Lighthizer. He made himself available. He came up and talked to us all the time. And while the full text of the agreement is not out, and I'm going to hold judgment until I get to read something, the reporting shows that it would be indeed better than NAFTA, which is very, very important. The ways that it would impact us directly here in Michigan, if the reports are correct, is that it would make it required that in order to call something an American car, it has to have a bigger proportion of American parts, of American engineering, of wages that pay at least $16 an hour in order for you to claim to call it an American car. And that is very important for our auto suppliers, our workers. That is very important, particularly as we know that we are sitting very close to one of the biggest areas in the world for auto supply chain, right? For our businesses here in Michigan. The other piece that I think is extremely important, and for me as someone who spent a lot of time negotiating agreements on the national security side of things, is the language that talks about how you enforce the USMCA. In NAFTA, if you look at how the deal was enforced, it had completely watered down language, so that if the Mexicans violated the agreement or the Canadians violated the agreement, we did not have an easy way to hold them accountable, to force them into arbitration, and any one side could veto the standing up of some sort of judging body on that violation. So surprise, surprise, nothing was ever enforced in the entire history of NAFTA. None of the three parties involved were ever held accountable for anyone's errors. And you just can't have a real agreement if you can't enforce it, right? You can't actually it won't mean something to have higher labor standards in Mexico if we can't clamp down on Mexico if they violate the agreement. So the good news is that, according to reports, the enforcement language that the President and the Speaker have agreed to has real teeth, so that if the Mexicans continue to violate labor standards to prevent unionization down in Mexico, we have the ability to hold them accountable, which would be a very, very positive change. One additional part, we're not in a part of the district that has a ton of farmers, but if you go into rural Oakland County, Livingston County, and rural Ingham County, our farmers are thrilled that they would end the piece of uncertainty about whether we would pull out of NAFTA. Our farmers benefit from trade, and were urging me repeatedly to get this done, and I'm very glad. It looks like we're poised to take a vote this coming week, so that's a positive thing. The other thing that we passed this past week was the Pentagon's budget, something called the National Defense Authorization Act. Every single year, the Pentagon puts in a request for the budget, for their budget, and every single year we negotiate it, Democrats and Republicans, and every year it passes. So this year we negotiated between a Democratic House and a Republican Senate and the White House to pass the Defense Authorization Act. It's a very big bill, there's a lot in it, but let me just highlight the pieces that I think are most important for Michigan. First and foremost, it's a 3.1% pay raise for everyone in uniform, for our active duty military. The widow's tax. So it was a technicality. I don't think anyone intended it, or I hope they didn't intend it, but there was a tax on our Gold Star families, right? Our families who have made the ultimate sacrifice and had a child, a brother, a family member lost in combat. Those families, through, I think, some bureaucratic problems, were being taxed and were not being given full access to the benefits that they deserve. So this budget repeals the widow's tax and will mean that our Gold Star families will have up to $12,000 more per year in their pocket, which I think we can all agree on. The other provisions that we negotiated, and these were some of the most hotly contested provisions of the Pentagon's budget. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's related to PFAS, the chemical that we're all extremely focused on here in Michigan. As we know, we have a very high concentration of PFAS contamination around our military bases, in Michigan, but frankly throughout the country. So lots of members on both sides of the aisle were very focused on making sure that the military is held accountable for that contamination. We have families, particularly around Oscoda, Grayling, some around Selfridge, who are really worried about their property values and, more importantly, the health of their drinking water as they hand it to their children and their loved ones. We had a debate about this. Frankly, we didn't get everything that we wanted. We passed a version out of the House, but it got changed when it went to the Senate. But it is important to note that for the first time, the Pentagon is being forced to do something more than just study PFAS. Up till now, it's just been studying and studying and studying. The commitments that they will have to live up to is, starting now, they cannot use PFAS firefighting foam in exercises, in practice, right? When they're just practicing their skills. And then, more importantly, the military has committed to transitioning off PFAS firefighting foam by 2024. They must find an alternative and completely rid themselves of PFAS, which is an important development. The piece that we didn't get, to be quite frank, is the ability to have PFAS in our EPA clean water standards as a regular chemical that we test along with a big family of chemicals. We did not succeed in that, and that was deeply disappointing for lots of us. But I think that we have the opportunity to go back next year and continue the fight. In the meantime, the Pentagon will be off this chemical that we know creates strange and early diseases by 2024, which is a start. That I'm guessing many of you are here to talk about, and then we'll transition to questions. If you haven't seen it, I did put out an op-ed this morning in the Detroit Free Press laying out my position. In an attempt to be transparent. And I knew from the very beginning that this was going to be right? That was something I understood from the very beginning. But it for me, it was something that was important to do as a matter of in September, I'm just going to keep on rolling. In September, September 23rd in the Detroit Free Press that I thought, after many, many months of not supporting an inquiry, that I thought it was time to come to have an inquiry. All of us had either a military or an intelligence community background.
No, you belong to Rashida! You're the party of Angry!
Some of my colleagues came out in support of an impeachment, frankly, when they were sworn in, January 3rd. That was one of the first things that some people did. A whole other group of folks came out around the time of the Mueller report and the Mueller testimony. And I didn't think that the events of that, or the actions of that time, were worthy of an impeachment inquiry. And I did it because I thought we needed to let the election of 2020 decide what was going to happen in our country. That changed for me on the very basic facts that the United States came out and very specifically that they had reached out to foreign power and asked him for information on political rights. Rudy Giuliani said it openly on television. The president responded bluntly when he asked by a reporter. And for me, that was fundamentally different. That was something fundamentally different. As a CIA officer and as someone who is sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, reaching out to a foreign power is something fundamentally different. That the President of the United States would reach out to a foreign power and ask for investigation. And this is very different from how presidents typically wield their power, right? To be honest with you, I worked for the National Security Council under George Bush. I worked under the National Security Council under Barack Obama. And presidents regularly wield their power. They regularly leverage their position to influence other countries. That's a normal part of what a president does. But what was fundamentally different for me is that the president decided to do this for his own political gain, not for the national security interests of the United States. So that was different, and I called for an inquiry. And over the last, I think it's 10 or 12 weeks that has gone on, there has been equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans asking questions, both in private and in public. And what we were presented with a couple of days ago was 2 articles of impeachment, 2 separate articles of impeachment. So I went about the process of doing what I have been trained to do as a CIA officer, which is to sit with all of the documents, all of the reports. I went back to the Constitution, to the Federalist Papers, to the House rules, everything that sort of created the source documents for this issue in front of us. And short of declaring war, this is one of the biggest decisions that I will be voting on in my short time in Congress. So I took it seriously, and I sat and did what I was trained to do, which was make an objective decision based on the facts. And I have come to the conclusion. There are 2 articles of impeachment that will be voted on next week. I believe it's this week, Wednesday or Thursday. One of them is an article of obstruction of Congress, and one of them is an abuse of power. And I just have to tell you, whether you agree with me or not, that I have attempted in all that I can to be transparent, to be communicative, to let you know what I was doing. And for me, this was an issue of principle. This was an issue in my own. If it becomes normal to ask foreign governments to intervene in the political process. When the next time we have a Democratic president asking the Chinese government to for me, this is something that I cannot abide, that I cannot. It gives the House of Representatives the sole power of impeachment. Our founding fathers put that into the Constitution, and no one can change what our founding fathers did. The President did something different than what President Nixon did, and President Clinton did, and President Obama many, many, many years ago did. And he gave the word to his administration to not produce any documents, to not respond to any subpoenas, and to not appear. Contravening the House's role and responsibility for the impeachment process. So I will be voting yes on obstruction of justice. And all I can ask from the people who are listening is that while we may not agree, I hope you believe me when I tell you that I made this decision out of principle and out of duty. I feel that in my bones, and I will stick to that, regardless of what it does to me politically, because this is bigger than politics. So I wanted to be responsive to those questions, and then we'll take some from the note cards that I think the folks have handed in.
Topics, obviously.
Where's Hunter Biden?
Why is it wrong for the president to want to investigate corruption before handing out our taxpayer dollars?
Hey folks, these are the questions you're shouting at me, so you may want to just listen for 1 second. The question was on why is it wrong for the president to be reaching out to Ukraine and trying to...
Why is it wrong for the president to want to investigate corruption before handing out our taxpayer dollars?
Joe Biden's
A few of the topics,
yeah, okay.
Just get them out.
So,
I want to hear.
How can you overturn the will of 63 million voters in 2016? And why don't you trust voters to make a decision for themselves in less than a year?
So, question on overturning the election, and why are we moving ahead with impeachment when election is in 2020. So for me, honestly, this is why I was not supportive of impeachment for many, many months, because I thought the election in 2020 should take care of it. But then the facts came out that the president was reaching out and seeking to influence that very election that I was counting on to have a democratic process. And that to me was different. Whereas the Mueller report and the information that came out in the spring was retrospective and looking back on 2016, the information that came out that the president and the president's lawyer talked about openly was about a future election, right? It was about 2020. So my ability to have confidence that that election was going to be the vehicle by which we could meter this out went down. And that was fundamentally different for me. Now, in terms of why are we trying to contravene I don't know if other people dispute it. I do not dispute that. And I do not dispute that 2020 will be an important moment in sort of our democratic process, and that we will have that. But the role of impeachment was put into the Constitution by our founding fathers. I didn't invent it. No one invented it. Our founding fathers put it there, and they put it there so that no one would be above the law.
Biden is a thief!
I think Hunter Biden, excuse me, not Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden. The question is, why wouldn't we investigate Hunter Biden? Or why couldn't the president be asking for an investigation about Hunter Biden and all those things? I personally have no special knowledge of Hunter Biden and what he did or did not do. Anything what happened in an American system, we believe there might be a credible case against another American. Just like us in our home communities here, if we think that there's a real problem with someone, we go to American law enforcement, American authorities. In our communities. Yes, sir. He can easily go to the FBI.
The deep state!
And let me just say something, because I know this is something that's come out in a number of our questions, right? About whether the President of the United States should trust the Ukrainian government over his own FBI.
The deep state!
I will tell you that this is one of those things that I feel very passionately, and maybe it's because I'm a former CIA officer. But we are going to have to disagree when it comes to distrusting our own FBI, our own CIAs, our own ambassadors, our own military. Like they can trust the Ukrainians more than they can trust the FBI. But that's not how I feel. And I hope that those civil servants who come every day to work are there to protect the country, and they are not less trustworthy than foreign governments.
Take some of the other questions from our office and other topics, and then some of the general topics. Why have Democrats run such a one-sided process, refused to grant Republican subpoenas, cut them off during their questioning, and held secret hearings?
Yeah, so we've had lots of calls to our office about the process, and let me just dispel, and these are things you can see yourself, but the process, Republicans have been in the room every single hour of every single hearing. At the beginning, those hearings were held in something called a SCIF, or a Secure Classified Information Facility. There were Republicans in that room, and then the hearings came into the public. And you all could watch on TV those hearings. And we heard from witnesses, from the Ambassador Sondland, who was the President's representative to the European Union, to civil servants, to uniformed military officers. The Republicans had just as much time to ask questions. They were able to have legal counsel. They had no rights that were different than the Democrats. And anything else that we have to say about that, frankly, is just not factual. So I think it's important that people realize that the process was put on TV to be transparent so that you can go back and watch it. In terms of the rules of the proceedings, there are rules that govern every committee hearing that we have, the committees that I'm on and everything else. Those rules need to be abided by. That is the rule of the House of Representatives. So if you were worried about people being my understanding is that they were maintaining or attempting to maintain observance of the rules. So the topic of the questions on impeachment, we call on the USMCA. So why did Congress drag its feet for so long on the USMCA? Did you just make businesses and workers and farmers wait for no good reason? Yeah, so as we talked about, we get a lot of calls about the USMCA because it so directly affects so many people in our district. And the process went on over a year, which frankly for a big deal, a big trade deal like this, is not totally uncommon. NAFTA took quite a long time too. But we wanted it to be better than NAFTA. So as I said, Ambassador Lighthizer, the man who negotiated it on behalf of the president, was extremely amenable. He was really just offering briefings even to freshman members, which I really appreciate, and I know he was doing that based on the guidance of the president. And it took a long time because there were some sticking points. There were some sticking points, particularly on the enforcement, making sure we didn't have just another deal that couldn't be enforced. But then some other things that, frankly, we wanted out of the agreement. There was a big, old-fashioned give to the pharmaceutical industry in the middle of that deal that would have given some exclusivity to the big pharmaceutical companies that just kind of stuck out like a sore thumb in the middle of a trade deal. It sort of, you sort of question why it was there. And we negotiated those provisions out of the agreement. And then there were some environmental concerns that people were concerned with. And to the president's credit, he accepted those changes. And we now have a deal that we're poised to support once we see the text this week. All right. So, is probably the third biggest topic that we get our questions on. The Congresswoman spoke about some efforts on prescription drugs, but a real common question that we get is, we need to fix our broken health system right now. Why don't you support Medicare for all? Yeah. So I get this question quite a bit. And in our last town hall, and I'm not sure if folks were there, but at Rochester Adams, we had protesters calling for Medicare for all. That's something we see at a number of our events. So let me just tell you where I am on healthcare. And I think some of you know that ultimately the reason I decided to get in this race was because of healthcare and because of my mom, who was a Detroiter and lived here in suburban Detroit and died in 2011 of ovarian cancer. And when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, she did not have healthcare. She had let it lapse. She struggled with healthcare her whole life because she had a pre-existing condition. When I was a little girl, she had breast cancer. She had a double mastectomy and a lymphectomy, and for the rest of her life had a pre-existing condition. My parents got divorced here in suburban Detroit in the 80s. She lost her job in 2002, so she lost her insurance. And because she because she had a pre-existing condition, she could not afford the health care that was on offer to her. So she went 5.5 years with no health care, no checkup, no gynecological exam, no one saying you had breast cancer as a young woman, you should really get a hysterectomy or genetic testing. In 2008, my brother and I helped her get insurance. It was $1,000 a month with a $10,000 deductible, her highest bill, higher than her rent here. And in 2009, without us knowing, she let it lapse. And in the fall of 2009, she walked into Henry Ford and was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So I'm sure many people in this room know what it's like to have a loved one get a terminal diagnosis. Your life just explodes. And that same week and that same month that our lives were exploding was the same work week and the same month that we spent filling out the paperwork for her to declare bankruptcy. So healthcare was the reason that I got in this race, and it is clear that our healthcare system is our generation's problem to solve. We are not settled as a nation on how we are going to administer healthcare. And I think the good news is most people agree that everyone deserves health care that they can afford, access to health care that they can afford. And most people agree that you shouldn't be gouged just because you happen to be born with a pre-existing condition, right? I think those are values that we've evolved to believe in, no matter what we believe we should or should not do. But I will tell you that I also believe in choice in healthcare. And I believe that it is important that people have access to affordable healthcare. They always have an option, but that they have choice in the matter. And I think choice in the matter is the way that you drive down costs, right? It's the good old-fashioned American way. For me, I believe in a public option, so that if you want, and if you want to leave your job and start your own company, if you're graduating college and you don't yet have your first job, if you're in between things, you always have an option that's available to you, that's good coverage at a good price. But it is not required that we don't have a Canadian-style healthcare system where people give up their insurance and they all have the same system. That is not what I believe in. And I think, to be honest, we have to be clear that, I live in Holly, we're not that far from Flint. Where I hear from people who will tell me that, I don't believe the government is good at providing basic things like clean water. So I'm nervous about the idea of the government taking over bigger sections of my life. I think we need to hear that. We need to absorb that. So that is where I am. I do not support Canadian-style healthcare, and I might as well be on record here along with everything else.
All right, so the last topic that is on clean water. So we'll take that, do that question, and then I'll move on to the questions that we have from the audience. So, on PFAS, really. We can't trust the water in our homes, that the water in our homes and schools is clean. So what are you doing to get PFAS out of our water systems?
So we talked about what we were doing through the Defense Department bill. That was just a convenient place to push the Pentagon and the military to do the right thing, because when you control someone's budget, you can often control what they do. So that's the vehicle we used most recently. But there has been a whole raft of legislation, very bipartisan, that we have put together on PFAS. The most important thing that happened is right after January 3rd, a representative from here in Michigan, Representative Dan Kildee, and a Republican representative from Pennsylvania, Brian Fitzpatrick, came together and started the PFAS task force. It's fully bipartisan. It will not surprise you that it's made up of mostly members from communities that are affected by PFAS. So a ton of folks in the industrial Midwest, upstate New York, people that have a manufacturing past or a lot of military bases. So we have a big group of folks who have done a ton of legislation. For me, the big one here is always going to getting the EPA to test for PFAS. That is the big thing that we should all be focused on. Right now, they are resisting adding PFAS. So it is often up to local people, local communities to test their own water. In Michigan, we have the highest PFAS standards in the country. And that is not by mistake, right? That is because of what we went through with lead and what we continue to go through with lead. We have the highest standards in the country. We are also looking harder for PFAS than any state in the country. So we have the most PFAS sites in the country right now, in the state of Michigan. So it makes sense that we are on the leading edge of this. We have done everything that we can in legislation. We passed, I think, over 20 bills on PFAS, and we're urging the Senate to take up that legislation. There are hundreds of bills right now on Senator McConnell's desk. Many of them are bipartisan. Over 200 of them had the support of both Democrats and Republicans. And I know not all of them are going to pass the Senate. We know that. We have a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. But I just want an up or down vote, just a fair shot, just a fair opportunity for things to be voted
If a question has occurred to you during our program today, you can stop by the table on the way out, fill it out with your name, your contact info. We will definitely get you a response, or you can find one of our staff members if you'd like as well. So, all right. First question. I'm really concerned about gun violence, especially at schools. What are you doing to keep our schools safe?
How many schools do you speak at?
So for the most important thing that we passed, actually was back in March, it passed on a bipartisan basis out of the House, was universal background checks and closing all loopholes. So that if you want, I grew up in a gun-owning family. When I went to Iraq, I was trained on a Glock and an M4. My husband, who's here in the front row, can we just give my husband, who stayed calm, I'm very proud of him for staying calm, as y'all just yell over there. He's a 30-year veteran of the Army, and he carried a weapon every day that he was deployed. So what it means to be a gun-owning family. But I think whether you're buying the gun at Dunham's or at Myers, at a gun shop, at the internet, or at a gun show, you should have to go through just a basic background check to make sure that you didn't go AWOL from the military, that you didn't abuse your spouse, that you don't have some severe mental illness. I think it's the baseline thing that we can do, and we already do it when we buy it at most of the stores here in the state. We passed that back in March. Unfortunately, that has sat at the Senate. It's one of the many bills that I actually think might have bipartisan support to pass, but it has not been brought up in the Senate. So we need to continue to urge the Senate to take that up. I also think that there's important legislation that we passed here at this, or that we've looked at here at the state level on red flag laws. Folks who know the veteran community, this is where my husband and I see it most directly. We see a situation where a veteran family knows that their veteran wants to hurt themselves. They know that the veteran is threatening to hurt other people. They know that the veteran has a legal gun in the house. It's completely legal. They have no ability to do anything about it. And that, for me, is a real problem. So I know that the state has introduced and has looked at some of these red flag laws. Those some of the same laws are being looked at, nothing's been introduced, are being looked at the federal level.
All right. So foreign policy question. Why do we spend so much time and resources on wars in the Middle East like Syria?
This is one that got a lot of attention recently because of the president's decision to pull us out of Syria. We still have some troops left some there, but he's made that decision. And to be honest with you, a lot of the folks who are going off to war, including my son-in-law's unit, are going to Iraq when they don't even remember things like 9/11.
You're worried about your handout because we paid for your bills?
This is truly pretty unusual situation for the United States, where we have 18-year-olds going off to wars where maybe their fathers served. That is the longest war that we've had in the United States. So I certainly understand what it has done to us as a generation and as a country to be so invested in these expensive wars in blood and treasure. And to be honest with you, Dave and I both served. We actually met in Baghdad in Saddam's palace. Dave was working for General Petraeus as an Army colonel, an Apache pilot, and I was working as a CIA officer. And it has been hard for us to watch our son-in-law's unit go into a war that we worked on, quite frankly. And I think that it has completely changed people's perception of war. And it's why when I'm in a place like this or at Michigan State University, people feel like they just need to work on things here at home. That large, major wars in the Middle East that we can't get out of do not advance our interests as in the United States of America and should not be gotten into again. So I understand that impulse because we lived it, frankly. And I lived it over 3 tours of going there and watching it get worse from one tour to another. So it's why, frankly, we moved to a strategy of working by, with, and through local partners, local militaries, folks on the ground from that neighborhood, instead of sending U.S. men and women to fight on the front lines. It's why in the last Iraq war, starting in 2003, we lost upwards of 5,000 men and women, Americans. But in countering ISIS, right, in fighting ISIS, it's without us on the front lines, with us kind of hanging back and providing air support and overhead cover, we've lost just 17 U.S. military. That is a major difference, both in blood and treasure, and it's why I was so concerned when the president pulled out unexpectedly and shirked our commitment to the Kurds in northern Syria. Because those guys have been fighting with us. Those guys can't be shot. And I remember we had reinforced our generals into Syria. They shook the hands of the Kurds and they said, if you go into places like Raqqa and fight ISIS hand to hand, right up close to the front lines, we will provide your support. And they did that, and they lost upwards of 12,000 in casualties. And when they found out, unexpectedly, that the president was now leaving, when they had to pick up their families and their lives and run, you can imagine what that does, and the message that sends to every other partner around the world, that if you work with the United States, you shake our hands, you never know if we're going to be there to support you. It was part of the reason I had a problem with the president's decision on that, because I don't want us on the long, entrenched wars in the Middle East. That doesn't make sense for us strategically.
Separated at the border. Why are children dying in custody in cages? Please keep updated
For me, I have worked my entire life in order to protect the U.S. homeland. That is what a CIA officer is trained to do. That is what the U.S. military is trained to do. That is your mission, is to keep the homeland safe. And I probably have a different view than some of my peers when it comes to ensuring the security and safety of our borders. We know that we're a border state right here. I've gone and spent some time with Customs and Border Patrol protection, with the folks who man the tunnel and the bridge, and building the new bridge, the Gordon Howe Bridge. It is of the utmost importance that we do everything we can to protect our borders and to make sure people who do us harm or who are public health risks aren't allowed into the country. That is our solemn responsibility as Americans, to make sure that we are safe here, certainly for leadership. That said, I don't think it's a contradiction for the United States of America to believe first in security for our country and in humanitarian standards for how we treat people. It's not a contradiction. If you serve in the military, that's how you're trained. If you serve in the CIA, that's how you're trained. If you are encountering someone on the battlefield and you take them into your custody, there is a certain set of rights and responsibilities that those people have, whether you're prisoners of war captured on the battlefield, whether you're federal prisoners in our prisons here in the United States, or whether you're an immigrant coming over the border seeking a better life. Now, that does not mean we believe in open borders. We cannot decriminalize coming over here illegally. I do not believe in that. Every country has the right to know who's coming into its borders and whether they are a threat to physical security or to our public health, always. What we need is to fix our completely broken and utterly broken immigration system. Utterly broken. Most acutely is, frankly, just sitting in my office in DC, I'll have all the business owners from Mackinac Island come in, they'll come and fly in at one time, and they will sit there and tell me, if we don't get more visas, I won't be able to keep the Grand Hotel open all year, or the fudge shops open all summer. When I get the farmers in, our farmers are some of the most vocal proponents of legal and safe immigration, because they cannot get the people that they need to work on their farms. So I believe in comprehensive immigration reform based on our economic needs, right? We have a right to dictate why and how people come to this country, and legal immigration that is safe, where we make sure we know who is coming in, who is staying in, and who should be kept out.
Okay, last question. As a small business owner, I've only seen rates go up under the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. What's your plan to help people like me, business owners, afford health care?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think that healthcare is our generation's problem to solve. No one feels good about how much they pay in healthcare. No one. And I think we have to acknowledge that the ACA had very important values, but then in execution, we had a lot of people who were paying way too much. It just is. And we have a situation in our country where people may have healthcare, but because monthly premiums are so high and the deductible is so high, they can't actually access their own healthcare. It's like they have catastrophic care, but not regular upkeep care. And I think we have to acknowledge that, and that Obamacare was part of that. But that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean that we say that system isn't working properly, so we're going to chuck it and not cover people with pre-existing conditions and not cover people until they're 26. That's not, to me, an either-or prospect. I do think that the healthcare industry has gotten away with amazing runaway costs. Amazing. And they have not been checked in the way that is appropriate for an industry that is responsible for people's lives. It is not building a new deck on your house, it is your healthcare. So, as I mentioned, I believe in a public option. I do not believe in forcing anyone into healthcare that they don't want, but I do believe they should always have an option for safe, responsible, and affordable care.
Thank you very much for coming out today. Please stay safe.